I want to talk about Through the Wire, and I've known about that podcast since really y'all started it, man.
I love
Because
him.
I had been on Kenny's channel. I've been on Kenny's channel for the longest, watching those rebuilds. That's really how I got into basketball, was through rebuilds and stuff like that.
Okay.
And it was really the first podcast that I ever really consistently listened to, because I didn't know about podcasts when I was, 14, 15 years old. I didn't know what that was. So that was the first time I was exposed to that industry. And it's really special, man, because obviously y'all grew up together. Y'all grew up knowing each other. Y'all grew up as close friends. And, to have a good podcast, there has to be a level of intellect, and there has to be a level of chemistry. You can have intellect, but if you don't have chemistry with the people that you're talking with, it's not going to be a good podcast, and vice versa. If you have the chemistry, but you don't know what the hell you're talking about, not a good podcast. So, talk to me a little bit how you guys came up with the idea, how you started executing it, and then how you ended up getting to the level to where you had House of Highlights knocking at your door, trying to get you associated with them.
So the way everything happened is, first and foremost, me and Kenny are cousins.
Yeah, that's right. I forgot that.
So me and him, obviously, like, we're cousins. Like, I know some people are like second, third cousins. Some people, parents are best friends and they just call each other cousins. Literally, my dad and his mom are siblings. Mm-hmm. So me and Catrell really grew up around each other because our parents are siblings. So we're really cousins.
Right.
But there was a time where I would see Catrell not as much because he lived over here and I lived over here.
Right.
And that's when we were younger. But at a certain age, he moved with his dad, which is right in my area. His dad lives like up the street, or used to live when they first, it was like 4 or 5 minutes up the street from me. So literally now he moves and we're literally going to the same high school now. So now it went from seeing Catrell whenever I went to my dad's house, which was every other weekend or, random ass times, to now I'm seeing him every day. And he's older, and you know what I mean? Right. And so I saw Catrell in the hallway. He's like, oh, damn, what up, blah, blah, blah. And so one of the times I saw him, he was with Mike from the podcast.
Yeah.
And me and Mike wasn't close or anything, but me and Mike grew up in the same complex, and he went to Burr Ridge Middle School as well, the middle school before high school. So I knew Mike, but me and him weren't like how we are now. So I was like, oh, like, this is my cousin. And he like, oh, no, this is my man, Mike. So I'm like, oh, damn, you friends with Mike? I know Mike. And then
I know how they go.
And then before that, after that, I seen him with Derek. And I'm like, oh, you know Derek too? I know Derek. And then I would just see them around, but that was their friend group. But again, I was older, so I wasn't really hanging around them too much then, but I would see them. And then I would really mostly see them and be around them when we would play basketball. We all went to the same YMCA, and then they played at the lower levels in high school. And, when you're in high school, the teams all travel together. So if we play against Proviso or whatever school, even though they're freshmen or sophomores and we're on varsity, they come too. So everybody's going together and everything. And then after that, they always had that. That was like, they have their friend group when their three was in there. And then I was always around because I'm Catrell's cousin and I do like play basketball and I'll see them. So then after that happened, as you know, Catrell started YouTube. Mm-hmm. And, I supported his YouTube thing, and it was just starting. It wasn't as big. And then he started consistently doing his thing and was getting bigger. And I had moved. Me and my brother had moved like on the other side of like Chicago. Shit, you wouldn't understand. But I moved far.
I know.
Now we're far again from each other. He's still in this area, but now I'm over here. And while I'm over here, I'm just doing my thing, just, whatever. Catrell is starting his thing. He's like, his YouTube is like gaining some ground. Maybe he's 20, 30,000 subscribers, which is a lot to us because it was like, oh shit, that's what's up. So me and my brother would sit in our theater. We had a theater, and we would put his YouTube videos on the screen like, damn, look at little cousin, he's funny. And he would say like basketball shit. And we'd be like, oh, hell no, blah, blah, blah. So he had started getting fans. And obviously, as my cousin, I follow him on Twitter. And he'll say something on Twitter about an opinion of basketball. And I would say something like, hell no, blah, blah, blah. And we go back and forth. Mm-hmm. And a couple of times that happened, I put in the group chat, man, we should start a podcast. The reason I had that idea or was even interested and knew what the podcast was because I'm a Joe Budden fan. So Joe Budden had just started a podcast, which is now the Joe Budden podcast. But when he first started it, it was called I'll Name This Podcast Later. It was before they had Maul. Maul is on there now, but at first they had a girl. And then also Adam 22, I don't know if you know who that is, from No Jumper. He had a vlog and a podcast, and he still does. It's the No Jumper podcast. I actually have a tweet that's almost a year, like identical, a year before we announced Through the Wire. I have a tweet that says I'm about to jump in the vlog/podcast game, and then a year later to that date, it's us all announcing Through the Wire. So I was watching those podcasts, and I'm like, man, I want to do one. I didn't know who to do it with. And then I started having like little discussions with Kenny, like on Twitter. I remember one of the ones was like Rondo. The Bulls had signed Rondo, and Kenny reacted to it on Twitter. Like, I don't know if I like this. And I'm like, wow, he just led the league in assists. You're tripping. And then it went to like the text, like, man, that would be a good debate for a podcast. And we flirted with the idea. And we would do that a couple times. Then we would have one in the group chat where it's me, Mike, and maybe a random guy from their friend group discussing. And I would be like, man, that would have been another good podcast thing.
Right.
We would talk about it, but there was never no action. So one specific time, I don't know what we was arguing about, but it ended, and we threw that out there again. Like, man, that would have been a good podcast thing. So Kenny was like, man, what's up? What y'all trying to do? We like, shit, let's do it. Him and Mike had plans on doing some type of music shit. So Kenny had this equipment that they were using for music, and he was like, I'll trade it in and get podcast equipment. And we was like, shit. I'm like, he was like, I'll see how much it costs. I said, let me know, and I'll put in whatever I need to put in, right? Because in my mind, that's how things go. Kenny took the initiative, and I'll always give him this credit. He took the initiative and just went and bought the shit anyway, which I credit him for, because I think that's important. Because sitting around, because if we had waited for everybody to come up with the money, like, because I was ready to put the money in, but I didn't know Mike or Derek's situation. Maybe we would have had to wait an extra 3 weeks. Yeah. Maybe we would have waited and something else would have came up when they were like, they choose to do something else with their money. You know, it just could have prolonged the situation. But when he went and got it and took action and took the initiative, it forced everybody to commit to it, right? Instead of having options and choices. So he did that, and I hit my homie up. So the first episode ever of Through the Wire, it's a video, and you can see us in a room. My homie plugged us with that room, and Derek has a different mic, because at first we thought it was me, KB, and Mike, because Derek was like, I'll do it, but we didn't take him serious. So Contrail ordered 3 mics at first, and then we had to get Derek's mic later because he was like, I was serious. And all of that. So, you know, D-Mills. Yeah. He has a different mic for the first year and a half of Through the Wire. His mic is different than ours. And then after we found out like that was going to be the 4, we made our own little group chat. And I remember the first conversations we had, it was, what are we going to title it? And I was such a Joe Budden fan that I took the idea of, he used to have a show with academics called Everyday Struggle, which is named after a Notorious B.I.G. song. So I told them, let's name our podcast after a legendary or classic rap album or song. And so we threw some names out there, like the Illmatic podcast. He was like, nah. The Reasonable Doubt podcast, nah. Then somebody, I think it's Kenny or Mike.
I like that one, Reasonable Doubt.
The Reasonable Doubt, yeah. But one of them said Through the Wire, and we all was like, boom, that's it. And then the rest is history. And then with House of Highlights, I believe Kenny emailed them, and that was just what it was. He emailed them. They liked us.
He took the initiative. He reached out. He said, "We got something right here for y'all."
Yeah. When we first was doing it, we were like, that was like stuff that we would joke about. Like, man, what if one day we were like House of Highlights?
Yeah.
And it actually happened. But I think we were able to even put ourselves in a position for them to even engage with us. Was we were constant, we were consistent, and that was something I was big on, like communicating with the squad. Like, let's make sure we do this. We was doing it once a week. Then when we made it 2 times a week, I was trying to like really make sure there was never a reason why we didn't drop. Like, basketball shows and things would stop during the off season. Not us. Like, we're giving you content when everybody else is in the off season or they're taking their break. That was the way that we gained ground on people who had a big separation for us.
Right.
And we also got a shout out from Jalen Rose, because when we first were putting our podcast on Apple, Through the Wire jumped above Jalen and Jacoby.
Really?
And on their podcast, they were looking at the rankings, and they said like, they were like, oh, it's something wrong with the algorithm. Like,
who these cats passing us up?
Yeah, and they said Through the Wire. It was like, yeah, Through the Wire. It's like a new podcast. They're in front of us, but it has to be something with the algorithm, which they're right. Like, if something is wrong, I don't know if they fixed it, but something is wrong with the algorithm, because we definitely weren't more popular than Jalen and Jacoby on ESPN. But it helped us because he was like, well, whatever. Shout out to Through the Wire. Y'all boys killing it, I guess. And like, that was real. And I remember Kenny heard it. He clipped it, reacted to it on Twitter. And Jalen Rose was like, much love. So
he did that on ESPN? Like, he did that on the show?
He did it on his show. They have a live show that's like visual, and then they also have a podcast one.
Right.
I believe this is just a podcast one.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm not mistaken, this is just the audio. I never saw it. I only heard it. So I'm guessing it was just the audio podcast. But for our fans, at that early stage, for them to see, it made them more invested, because they like, oh shit, like, this is something that's real. It started off at first like, oh, this is Kenny and these are his little friends and this is cool. But like, a lot of steps made people like really start to take us serious as not just like, oh, this is something new Kenny is doing, but it's like, this is Through the Wire podcast. Because for the first beginning moments, it was like, oh, this is Kenny with his friends. But then it was like, oh shit, this is Through the Wire. And then my followers started going up, and people became fans and stans of me. And you know, same with Mike and D Mills, their followers started going up. So that's when it became real. And then the House of Highlights thing, once they showed that they had interest, it was the perfect thing. And we flew out to meet with them, had conversations, and they were legit. And it was welcoming with open arms, like a real family. And I've never looked back since.